After over 2 years of a total war, there's nothing left standing of those cities by the shore, which they once called Gaza, part of ancient Palestine. Now just miles of rubble divided by a yellow line. There are no playgrounds left.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and the issue of AI and the effect on artists and workers in this country is a critical question for millions of workers in the United States and workers all over the world. And what we're going to be talking about today is how that is relevant to the artists of this country and internationally. And joining us is David Rovics. He's a longtime political musician and has been delving into using AI in his work. So welcome to our show, David.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be with you.
So David, how long have you been a musician?
Pretty much all my life, but I started taking cello lessons and at the age of 9. So I suppose that might be the point to say I started.
And your father, you said, was a writer, or?
Yeah, my father's a composer. Or I mean, he's now 89 and a bit, not really composing anymore, but he still plays the piano beautifully, and he's that's what he did for his whole adult life, teaching at Long Island University, composition and theory. And my mother was a concert pianist.
So you began as a musician. Why did you become a political musician? What brought you to become a political musician and taking up political issues, Palestine, all working class issues?
I mean, I guess it started out with whatever kinds of stuff my mother was getting in the mail. We were always getting all kinds of left-wing organizations sending all kinds of stuff, which I guess was happening because she was subscribed to that, which I didn't really realize at the time. This is just what came in the mail. Doesn't everybody get stuff about nuclear disarmament and in the mail? But it was Reagan and the arms race and the prospect of nuclear war with the Soviet Union, and the dangers of nuclear power. All of that was kind of the beginning of my awareness that everything was not well, and it was just before Reagan came to power. Actually, it was with 3 Mile Island and the nuclear situation, the danger of nuclear power. But then Reagan came to power, and I was especially concerned about the danger of a nuclear war. So that's how it started with me, and it got spread from there to other issues.
And your music, surviving as a musician, that has also been an issue for not only you, but other musicians throughout the country and internationally, how to survive.
That's a tough one, and it changes all the time, just like with so many other professions, with all the changes in technology. And it's always been a big challenge for musicians anywhere to figure out how to survive, as a musician, if you're actually aiming to do it for a living, which increasingly smaller numbers of people are. According to the tax records, the numbers just declined dramatically over time in this country, in terms of the number of people who say that in the tax records that that they are professional musicians. If they were professional musicians, it would make a good sense to file the taxes as such. It works out pretty well for self-employed people like that. So if they're not actually self-employed anymore, and they're having to get a job, it's not something they'd want to admit on the tax records. I'm sure that it's very accurate. We've lost like half the people who used to be professional musicians, like between 2010 and 2020, stopped working as such. And that there's a great book about all of that called The Death of the Artist, that a guy from Portland, Bill Deresiewicz, wrote, that really documents the decline of all forms of the arts, very much including music, with the rise of all these new technologies.
Why don't you go through some of the changes you had to make in your battle, like different technologies, how it forced you to, deal with this crisis and the monopolization also of the media and corporate control of streaming and that kind of thing. Can you talk about some of those developments?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it was so there was the period of the 90s, which was, in retrospect, sort of a golden age for independent musicians, because people were still buying lots of CDs, and you could produce your own recordings, more easily than ever. It was so much no longer the case that you needed to be on a record label, and needed all that, to pay somebody to do all these things that you could do yourself. And so it was a good time to be a musician, from my experience back then. And in the U.S. as well, there were also all these college gigs everywhere. But because of a lawsuit between the U.S. Student Association and, that they lost, and I don't know all the details. I know other people who do, but basically all the college gigs ended. As far as like progressive student organizations with budgets, that phenomena, as a phenomenon, that was over like 20 years ago. So for me, a lot of other musicians and speakers, that was a very dramatic thing when all the college gigs ended. And with the rise of social media, um, that was another big thing that changed the whole landscape, because independent musicians used to use, we used to always have email lists, and some of us, like me, still have an email list. But because of the way that these technologies presented themselves, especially Facebook back in 2006, they made themselves so useful to people, that they made a lot of people decide, oh, we don't really need email anymore. We've got Facebook. We don't need email lists. We don't need to communicate with people that way, because we can post on Facebook about a gig coming up and we get an audience. Oh, wow, this is great. So that worked well for a little while, just long enough for so many people to stop using email lists, that Facebook got everybody kind of hooked in. And then they introduced, the boost, so artists like me, who had thousands of followers on the platform, no longer were getting our posts seen. Now we had to boost, to pay to have anybody see our posts. Most users of Facebook remain unaware that this is a phenomenon, because if you have a personal account, you don't have the opportunity to boost anything. It's only if you have a public facing, like a page, that you have the option of boosting. So a lot of people, they don't even know that this is a thing, or they don't know why they don't see your posts anymore, why they don't know you're playing. So this became a massive obstacle around that time. And then Spotify started their free tier in 2013, which meant that anybody could get all the music in the world for free without paying a monthly fee, just listening to some advertisements. So that became the dominant way that most people in the world consume music. So, what that meant was, for me and millions of other musicians, in 2013, we stopped selling CDs. We lost half our income. Many of us, like me, were making half of our income from selling CDs. That was gone. It was not gone because of streaming or the internet or MP3s generally. It was gone because Spotify started their free tier. And it's really important for people to understand that. This is what destroyed the independent music scene. Not just the internet. It wasn't just the internet. It was specifically what Spotify's corporate practices, which all the other streaming platforms had to follow. Once they started their free tier and started vastly underpaying artists, everybody else did the same thing. So when they talk about, like, oh, people should leave Spotify and go to Tidal or whatever, it's a fine idea, but it's basically all the platforms pay badly, because they have to, in order to compete with Spotify. Once a company that big starts paying badly and, getting so big, if they're going to try to scale up too, they have to basically follow the same kinds of practices, in the absence of governments actually controlling these corporations. So then that was one massive obstacle, which meant that, like, studios are closing all over the country, all over the world. Musicians, like, the idea of paying to make a recording, and hiring musicians and engineers and producers, it just increasingly became a thing of the past, because nobody had money for that. Very few people had money for those kinds of things. But at the same time, as most of us didn't have any money for big studio projects anymore, the technology for home recording was because everybody knows at this point, was becoming better and better, right? So like so people got into making recordings themselves because of necessity, and this is kind of a very encapsulated version of the history of the music industry of the past 25 years. But then AI comes along, right? AI music generation comes along at a time when already the vast majority of people who formerly made a living as musicians were no longer making a living, and already at a point where most of the studios had closed and session musicians were already a thing of the past, and musicians were already doing all their own recording in their bedrooms and their own multi-tracking because they couldn't afford to hire anybody. That was already the situation when AI music generation comes along. So then all of us who have been making like solo recordings or doing remote collaborations or all kinds of stuff that we doing what we could do in the absence of the ability to go into a music studio and hire a bunch of musicians to make a real album the way we all want to, you know, you start playing with this technology because it's there and it's $10 a month and it apparently legal, and I don't make the laws, but here it is, and most musicians are using it. This is the big disconnect here between the people that hate AI and the people that don't hate AI. I mean, you can hate AI and wish it didn't exist and still use it at the same time, which is my position, and that's my position on Spotify as well. You can hate free streaming, and you think I wish it didn't exist, but that's how people get music. So of course I'm going to be on Spotify. Not being on Spotify is being invisible. And by the same token, if you're not using AI music generation platforms to make amazingly high quality, music, then you're just going to be out of the game. And I'm absolutely convinced that that's the case. It's just as much the case as it was with the idea of getting onto Spotify or not getting onto Spotify. Anybody who's not on Spotify today, any musician who's not on Spotify today, nobody knows who they are. They're invisible. I mean, they may have a fan base in some local area, and they may still be selling CDs to that fan base in that local area because they have refused to be on Spotify. But all the fans that they might have had in all these other countries, they don't have because everybody's listening on Spotify. And if Spotify isn't recommending that track, then they're not going to hear it. And YouTube Music being number 2. And as you know, all of my albums were deleted from YouTube Music at the end of November.
Why don't you talk about what YouTube did? Because part of the monopolization of media and these technology companies is also combined with censorship and them playing a role in what people can hear because of the politics. So why don't you talk about what your experience was with YouTube?
First, in the fall of 2023, I wrote a song called "Song for the Houthi Army," which is a song in praise of the Houthi army's efforts to prevent Israel from importing arms and other things on the Red Sea. And so this song, it's, I think, worth noting that what the Houthis have been doing is an effort to enforce international law. And, opposing their efforts is really in opposition to international law, because Israel is violating international law every minute. And the Houthis, the Ansar Allah, are trying to prevent that from happening. So clearly they're the ones on the side of international law, not Israel. But, YouTube and other platforms don't care about that. They're much more interested, I think, in what the U.S. government and the Israeli government think than what, international law says. So when this song it was deemed by YouTube, and as well probably by the British government, who have all kinds of anti-speech laws that they've recently been passing. But this law was deemed by YouTube to be, this song was deemed by YouTube to be violating their rule on supporting criminal organizations. And criminal organizations, of course, any organization that's illegal. So it could be, it could be a group like the Houthis or Palestine Action, the nonviolent civil disobedience group in England. That's where currently there are, I think, 18 members on hunger strike, and they've been not eating for 40 days now in prison. But So I wrote songs about the a song for the Houthi army and a song called "I Support Palestine Action." And basically, every time somebody flags one of those songs, it gets taken down by YouTube, and then they send me an email saying this song has been taken down for violating our rules on supporting criminal organizations. And then they send a follow-up email saying that my YouTube channel has been permanently demonetized, which for which there's no recourse. They just decided I support criminal organizations, so my whole channel is demonetized. But I kept on putting the stuff up on YouTube because that's where people are. I'm not in it for the money. That's what that people are. If people want to watch a video or find a song, the first thing they're going to do is go to either Spotify or YouTube. Depending on whether they're more video oriented or audio oriented. But when they go to YouTube and look for a song, they might come up with whatever they're looking for. But then YouTube will recommend the next track right after they listen to that one, and that recommendation could be anybody related to that track that they think the user might want to hear. So basically that's how a lot of people hear my music, because of these recommendations on both YouTube and Spotify. So then what YouTube did just at the end of November, a couple weeks ago, was they deleted all my albums from YouTube Music. So what that does basically is anybody going to YouTube to look for me, you'll still see me there. You'll still see videos of me playing in festivals and parks and protests and indoor concerts and stuff like that. What you won't see is any of those tracks from any of the albums. So when you go to YouTube, sometimes you'll see like just a picture of an album, and you play the track, and it's just a picture of an album, and you're hearing the track from the album. So that's YouTube Music. So when you use YouTube Music to distribute your stuff, you distribute your music through a distributor. They put it up on Spotify, YouTube Music, and like 100 other platforms. But the only two that really matter is Spotify and YouTube Music. Those are by far the dominant ones in the world outside of China. And so when they deleted all my albums, what that means is their recommendation algorithms will no longer point people towards any of my songs. If somebody's listening to Billy Bragg and hearing his song about the workers uniting, and then they think, oh, maybe they want to hear David Rovics' song about the workers of the world uniting, and they won't, because that album has been taken down along with all other albums of mine.
So we're talking about Google.
Yeah, this is Google. Yeah.
Google
And Google has sometimes they delete people's entire Google accounts, but other times they just delete, their YouTube or, I mean, in the case of some journalists, they've been deleting like all their content. Journalists covering Palestine and the genocide in Gaza, they get all their content deleted. I was just on Flashpoints the other day with a journalist who had all his content deleted, including his Google Drive. So all kinds of stuff that he was just storing there privately, which included Israeli soldiers committing atrocities, it's all gone. It's erased. I guess he didn't have all of it backed up on a hard drive. He was just using Google Drive, like so many of us do, as a hard drive, but it's not a hard drive, and Google can take it off of there anytime they want. And it's very, very, very 1984. The only bands I know of that have had all of their albums wiped from YouTube, I have discovered that I was not the first, but the only ones I know of is the completely openly fascist band Screwdriver, which had all their albums taken off by YouTube, and another openly fascist band called No Remorse. They also had all of their albums taken down from YouTube. So it's them and me, as far as I know.
So you have Facebook with Zuckerberg, and you have Google basically sanitizing their sites for artists who are political and are challenging the genocide in Gaza and the role of Israel and other struggles, the Houthis who are fighting the genocide, supported by the United States, who back Israel. Now, the development of AI is a important issue. And in fact, when I covered the strike of the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA, the Writers Guild members were saying this was an existential issue for them. That unless they could control it or regulate it, their whole industry, their craft would be destroyed.
Absolutely. AI is an existential issue for everyone. It's an existential issue for anyone who is doing any kind of work that involves their brain. If you do work that involves your brain, and it can be work that can be done with a computer, then you're going to be out of work soon. And that applies to everybody. And anybody that doesn't think that what I'm saying is true, I will happily bet you whatever amount of money you want to bet me. And
Well,
I will look forward to winning that bet.
How did you come to that conclusion?
By using AI. That's what a lot of people don't do. Most of the people who don't think AI is that important or that powerful don't use it. And that's half of society. The other half of society, has some familiarity with it, mostly because their bosses tell them they have to use this stuff. So they do what they're told. And 1% of the population has ever used a AI music generation platform. So that means that 99% of the population has no idea how powerful this technology is from the standpoint of using it, right? But most professional musicians, most today, according to some poll I was reading recently, most of us use AI music generation platforms. And why wouldn't we? It's so amazing. This technology is absolutely amazing. And people don't even, most people have no idea just how amazing it is because they have they're not using it. And maybe some people, maybe they used ChatGPT when it first became a public free platform, but they haven't used AI chatbots recently. So they don't realize just how fast they're improving in every possible way. This technology is absolutely astounding.
And in your industry, as a musician, what does it mean to use AI in developing your work and using your work? How do you do that?
Oh, well, I what I've been doing with Suno at the platform is Suno. It's probably the most popular platform. Is using it as to generate music after I write the lyrics, which is the most time consuming and hardest part of songwriting. I would put forward, but I write the lyrics, and which AI still does not do very well. I mean, I'm not trying to get AI to write lyrics, but occasionally I do, and every time I'm very disappointed with their. It's always like the kind of stuff that you'd expect from like an 11-year-old, with a lot of knowledge and a terrible ability to rhyme, and it really, it's not good. Which is interesting. It's like what they have to work with is pop music from the past century, most of which is really badly written songs. So it's not surprising that that AI doesn't write very well. Most people don't write very well. Most professional songwriters don't write very well. Most of the stuff that becomes pop music is not very well written, in my humble opinion. And neither, but what they do with music, that's a whole other reality. I mean, because there's a lot of bad songs that have been recorded really, really well. So they have a lot of stuff to work with from the past century of recorded music, and with this how the technology works. And so I put in lyrics and I give prompts. I'm a prompt engineer. We're all going to be prompt engineers if we have any work at all. And I give prompts, instructions to Suno saying what I'm looking for. So take these lyrics and I'll give it a command like newgrass chanson skiffle with oud, minimal instrumentation, satirical vibes, modal sound. That's an example of the kinds of commands I'll give it, and then see what it does with that. And then depending on how it responds to those commands, I'll modify the commands. And we go through this process 30, 40, 50 times, 60 times. And then eventually, after I've done enough changing of the prompts and refining of the prompts and also refining of the lyrics and the spacing and the punctuation, because it responds to things like where you put in a comma. So you end up putting a lot of commas in where it makes no sense other than that you're trying to get it to phrase things the way you want it to phrase things. So like that's basically it's kind of like speaking English it's like vibe coding is what they call vibe coding. It's like you don't need to know much about programming to vibe code, but it sure helps if you do know a lot about programming, and then you'll be a much better vibe coder, right? It's exactly the same with music generation AI. Like if you're already a musician who has worked in studios with bands, which is like what, less than 1% of the population have ever had the pleasure of that experience. But if you've ever worked in a studio with a great engineer and a producer and a bunch of great musicians who are all there to take your instructions and do what you want them to try to do, it is just like working with a band. And it is really just like working with a band. It's just that it's a weird bunch of musicians. They never sleep. They're always ready to do anything you want to do. But they respond to your instructions in all kinds of weird and unexpected ways, like a little more unexpected than a typical human. But that can be really cool, and then it just gives you the idea for what your next prompt is going to be to try to do something with this weirdness. Like sometimes it's a weirdness that you want some of that, but not quite that much of it. So you find a way to rephrase things, and it'll give you a little of that and not as much as it had just done. It's there's actually on Suno, there's a weirdness dial.
And what this means for the people who used to do that kind of work, the engineers,
unemployment.
So that means that they don't have a future. These people really don't have a future in this system.
None of us do. And it's, we are at a crossroads here in human society where AI is going to replace all of our jobs. And we have to understand that reality that we're now facing. And we have to realize that just as with the Industrial Revolution, 200 years ago, there is no way to confront this monumental obstacle without organizing as a class. The working class has to organize as a class to address the basic inequities of the capitalist system, which are going to become so much more pronounced under the rule of the tech corporations with AI in control than ever before. And if we keep on thinking in terms of organizing the way the writers union and the musicians union and the screenwriters and all that, it's a lost cause. All of them are fighting a totally lost cause. They're not going to be able, none of them are going to be able to make the kind of, they're not going to be able to turn AI into an effective revenue stream. Some people will, not none. Some people will. Some of the most famous artists will be able to turn, their likeness and their voice and whatever into a revenue stream. But the reality is, most people don't need those famous people. You already have the technology. It's already built. You don't need to imitate the voice of some particular person. I don't know why I would ever want to do that. I'd rather make new stuff, But the idea that people are going to be able to, look at what happened with music streaming. I mean, the music industry overall shrank by 80%, when music streaming came around. And then they made a settlement with the music streaming platforms in 2013 to say, okay, we'll let you use all of our music for free, and we accept the fact that the music industry is now 20% the size it used to be. They just realized that that's what they have to deal with. That's the new reality, and they, because it's the big tech companies making the money now, not the record companies, not the other companies. The big tech companies, they get the money, and then they work out deals with other companies if they think they need to. But we need to organize against that whole phenomenon. Not one industry at a time. That'll be just a way to, commit suicide.
And yesterday, Trump, the fascist government, instituted an executive order saying that AI is going to have can do what it wants. The developers of AI, the billionaires, and David Sachs, the techno-fascist billionaire from South Africa who lives in San Francisco, who's been appointed by Trump to be head of digital development and cryptocurrency, was interviewed, and they asked him, "Well, what's the future for workers?" And he said, "It's going to be great, and people are going to be prompters." What you're talking about, prompting.
Yeah,
AI.
I think it's not going to be great. He's entirely wrong there. But unless they do something like introduce universal basic income so that nobody needs to worry about making a living anymore. I mean, because being able to make a living with AI taking all our jobs is going to become, and is already, very difficult, and is going to become increasingly difficult. If anybody listening, watching here knows anybody working in the IT industry, which I bet a lot of you do, then you know what I'm talking about. They can't find work. You know, if they lose a job, it might take them months to find another job, and it's going to pay a lot worse than the last one did. This is not a happy industry, and it's also that it applies for so many other industries. Very much applies to musicians and writers and screenwriters and the entire arts industry. It's but pretending the technology doesn't exist, sticking your head in the sand, not using it. I mean, it's just like not getting a job in the factory after the government took your land at gunpoint. Like if they force you to off the land and and now you have to live in a city, what do? Well, you get a job in the factory. You can't farm anymore. You get a job in the factory. You don't starve, right? We're in the same situation. So those who can will become prompt engineers, and I certainly intend to be one of them. And but 90% of the rest of the population will not have anything to do anymore. All those session musicians, all those producers, all those, they're all going to be out of work, and I think that's horrible. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to use the technology and just stop making music because I can't afford to hire musicians anymore. I'll use the technology. They've engineered the situation, and but this technology is a double-edged sword, and it does have all sorts of positive applications. And I think what I've done with it, the music I've made, if people look up Aitsuno, Aitsuno, which is a Japanese woman's name, but it's just the name of the entity that I call that I give for my AI collaborations. And if people look up Aitsuno and listen to any of the last 3 or 4 albums that I've put out in the past 2 months, then you'll see the music is really good. It's amazing. The sad songs will make you cry. The happy songs will make you dance. There's really catchy choruses. The lyrics are really well written because I wrote them, but the music is really, really good. And there's a whole lot of variety, way more variety in the music than you would ever be able to get in a real reasonable budget studio effort recording. Because everybody can play everything. You don't need to hire a banjo player. This song will have oud and kora and stand up bass, and the next song will have a bluegrass band. You can do whatever you want, and it is absolutely astounding. And all the musicians I talk to who are playing with it are all in the same mentality as me. They're all like, wow, this is going to destroy the industry, but gosh, this is amazing. And I mean, it's a terrible thing for the session musicians for sure, but for any songwriter especially, this technology is absolutely irresistible. I could change the world by not using it. I'd not use it, but I know that I'm not going to change anything by not using it.
And that raised the question of business unionism. The trade unions in the United States, they're capitalist ideologically. They support capitalism. In fact, they support imperialism. I mean, they haven't opposed the military budget. The United States just passed, the Democrats and Republicans, Adam Smith and one of them, passed a budget of $980 billion for war. That just passed the Congress. I mean, they don't have money for
980. Wow. It was 700 billion just a few years ago.
They don't have money for housing. They don't have money for health care, but $980 billion for the war machine. And no national union said, hey, how about education? How about social services? How about housing? But it also raised the issue of unions confronting AI, because my union, the CWA, has set up a committee. They're having some publicity about to defend journalists. Journalists are threatened, obviously, but technicians, all sections of workers are threatened. Call centers are threatened. It seems that if union is discussing and dealing with it, that it's dealing it industry by industry. And what you're saying is impossible to deal with this phenomena.
It will be impossible. It is impossible. I'm quite convinced of that. It was impossible in the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago, and it will be impossible for all the same reasons with the AI revolution. Absolutely. Trade unionism is dead. We have to organize as a class. It's the only way that this is possibly going to be confronted effectively. It's not the first time.
The issue of organizing a class. I mean, there's been a movement for a general strike of the
Yeah,
working class against the genocide, against the ICE raids, the militarization of the cities. And that could be one of the issue of protection of workers who are facing AI. What would be a program to defend working people? You say an organized income or a guaranteed income, yet basically neither the Democrats or Republicans are are interested in income for all working people. In fact, they're taking away subsidies for healthcare, not single payer and national healthcare, but subsidies going to the insurance companies. The Republicans are right about that, but then they take money from the insurance companies. That's why we have a
yeah,
privatized healthcare system. So the issue
yeah,
of how to organize as a class in the face of
yeah.
AI, I think is a real important question, critical question. If unions like AFTRA,
It's
SAG,
critical.
Writers Guild, my union, the Journalists Union, can't defend themselves using a contractual relationship, a business union orientation, how are they going to defend themselves?
Yeah, and if I said if I went into the kind of detail about what we really need to do in order to organize effectively as a class against this monolithic situation with I would get arrested. I mean, we need to do a lot of things that that are the Taft-Hartley Act, of course, is going to be, all the unions are going to, anybody, of course, if there's going to be any kind of a real general strike, which I don't think there will be at this stage, I don't see any sign of that other than a few posts on Instagram. But if there's going to be any kind of a general strike, it's going to mean all those unions being decertified as unions because they'll all be breaking the Taft-Hartley Act, which is why we haven't had a general strike since 1919 or whatever. It's,
46, the
I mean,
last general strike was in 1946
46,
in Oakland. In Oakland,
and then they passed the Taft-Hartley Act, right? It was
they,
soon
they,
after that they passed the Taft-Hartley Act, right?
they wanted to stop general strikes. But there are general
Yeah,
strikes in Italy. There was a general strike in November 28th against militarism, against the attack on the working class, and against the genocide in Gaza. And they stopped all ships going to Israel with military cargo. So I think, though, that Trump and these techno-fascists are agitating for collective action. Basically, the mayor of
yeah,
Chicago, Brandon Johnson, called for a general strike. Sarah Nelson, who's president of the Airline Flight Attendants, the CWA, has called for a general strike against the attack on federal workers. So it's in the air. But
yeah,
this
yeah,
issue of AI is an issue that is affecting all workers, even construction workers. They're using
yeah,
AI and tractors to do work of construction workers. I mean, in every
yeah.
area. But it seems that we're going to be having a conference this weekend in San Francisco on AI, the future of San Francisco. It seems that it's such a fundamental attack on the working class that is forcing workers to break from business unionism and say, as a class, all workers have to unite around this issue. You can't do it one industry, one company at a time. It's a social crisis and it's a system crisis. And that's, I think, what's frightening to the union bureaucracy.
Absolutely, it's terrifying to the union bureaucracy, and the which is, yeah. And they're going to be completely irrelevant if they keep up their traditional orientation of organizing by trade. I mean, and which has been a problem with the union bureaucracy ever since there's been a union movement. I mean, the IWW and the CIO had the right idea, but the AFL has been following this trade unionist path since the 19th century, and it's been a failed orientation since the 19th century, but it is absolutely it will be a disaster in this situation. And I mean, this, when you look at the trade unionist sort of orientation as it has applied to the music industry, I mean, the American Federation of Musicians has been largely a pathetic organization for decades. They're always been oriented towards the salaried musicians, and that's like 1% of professional musicians who are on a salary. But this is the kind of, because it's a union and they need to be having employers to organize around, and trying to organize musicians who are just playing freelance gigs and not getting paid enough on streaming. I don't think there's a good revenue stream for a union bureaucracy to sustain itself on that kind of organizing. They can sustain themselves on organizing the symphony employees, and the employees of the movie studios and the employees of the big record companies, but that all of those people combined represent probably like 1% of the actual, numbers of professional or semi-professional musicians who could benefit from, the kind of organizing that actually, takes into account what matters for us, which is like how much we're getting paid for streaming, for one thing, it's the biggest thing that matters for us.
Well, the issue of, like, for example, reducing the work week. If there's not enough work, then you reduce the work week to 30 hours a work week or 20 hours a week as a way of defending working people. It would seem that task or that program would almost require a revolution within this capitalist system. Since the
Yeah.
capitalists are saying, let's deregulate, they don't even want to have any controls on the minimum wage, the living wage. There is no change in the U.S.
No.
wage rate, 720 nationally in 30 years, no change in the wage rate. It seems like it's a frontal
Absolutely. It's a frontal assault, and it has been for a long time. And you can see that it's because we don't have powerful organizing. I mean, the business class, the capitalists are very well organized and have endless resources to make sure that they're continually very well organized. But for us, it's a very sporadic phenomenon that depends on whether there's a social movement going on at the time that has captured the imagination of millions of people. And when there is a social movement like that going on, amazing things have been accomplished against the capitalists. And you can look at the 30s for the most dramatic examples of that, but the 60s were pretty good too. But in the 30s, it was the crisis of capitalism was such that the capitalists themselves realized that things were not going to work as they had been, and they had to actually support these, relatively, socialistic programs of the New Deal and all that, and which were largely supported by both parties and as well as by a whole lot of the capitalists, the more enlightened among them, who realized that we don't have a revolution here. We don't have them, overthrowing us and chopping off our heads. We want to just, if we have to make a little bit less money, then that's okay. And so, the U.S. got through the 1930s, without becoming a fascist country, and without, having a famine. The hungry, and there were many, many of them, were fed, and they were fed by the government, largely. By government policies, they didn't have any work, but the government reallocated resources so that the 1/3 of the population that would otherwise perhaps have starved to death didn't. So we didn't go the route of Nazi Germany, because they were facing the same kinds of contradictions, and they didn't rise. The government there was not able to rise to the occasion and feed the people. And a failure to feed the people leads to dramatic consequences, and those dramatic consequences can take, as we know, looking at the past century, they can take a very far right turn or a left turn. You can form an egalitarian movement that's all about having enough for everybody, or you can have a movement form that says, we're all threatened, we're all going hungry, we can't afford to have any more immigrants, we have to kick out all the immigrants, we have to, whatever. It's a prime time for that kind of logic to appeal to a lot of people who are not very, well familiar with how divide and conquer works and how history has worked. Most people don't know about those things. That's been a socially engineered phenomenon that most people are basically completely ignorant of history. They have no idea that there's ever been a general strike in this country. They have no idea
any general strikes.
Anywhere. Yeah, they don't even know what it is, most people.
And the unions don't really educate people about general strikes. They're afraid.
No, they're afraid of general strikes. The unions, because of course it's illegal. I mean, the unions want to keep alive. They want to survive and not get decertified. And the Taft-Hartley Act bans solidarity between unions, and certainly bans general strikes. That's an extreme example of solidarity between unions. In Sweden, they have a slogan, "Long live the illegal strikes," because in Sweden, they tried to also, back in the 1930s, they also tried to pass a law banning solidarity between unions, and that's when they had a general strike. And they repealed that effort to, didn't pursue the effort to ban solidarity in Sweden. So they say that the most important strikes they ever had in Sweden were illegal.
And the rise of fascism in the United States, you have basically, in my view, a fascist government. You have these techno-fascists, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, other David Sachs, who basically are in the government and running the government for the purpose of increasing their profits, deregulation, putting in Project 2025, which is a fascist program. And they are using the state apparatus and control the state with ICE to build up a military force, a fascist military force, to probably try to prevent another election, to implement martial law. Are you concerned about fascism?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about fascism. I think, I'm not. Yeah, I'm concerned about my own personal welfare, but I'm much more concerned about a lot of other people in society who are not citizens, especially. But I believe that they're trying to provoke, the Trump administration is trying to provoke the kind of violence that would be sufficient for them to realistically, at least in some circles, declare an insurrection. And I think they really would like to have something along the lines of the Los Angeles rebellion of 1992 or something. It doesn't even need to be nearly that big, but that's the kind of thing they would like to have in order to put the Insurrection Act into effect. And once they do that, they can do anything. They can ban elections. They can postpone elections, or they can round up all kinds of people on suspicion of being communists, anarchists, socialists, or whoever they think is the enemy. With the Insurrection Act, they'll have they have such vast power in the executive branch, which the Congress gave them in 2001, which people don't seem to remember. But, that's one of the biggest reasons why the executive branch has as much power now as it even does. But once they put the Insurrection Act into effect, then they'll have unlimited power to do whatever they want. And I think that before the next elections, or before the next elections after those, like before the next presidential elections, if not the next elections, they'll find a reason to put the Insurrection Act into effect.
And the union
I think it's terrifying.
Union bureaucracy is saying, let's wait to the midterms. Do you think they're going to allow elections in the midterm? Because right now there's a tidal wave against the Republicans. They're getting wiped out all over the place. They can't afford. Can they really afford to have elections in the midterms with what's happening in this country?
I don't know. I think I think it's a really good question, and I think they can't afford to have elections in a sense, but at the same time they can't afford to cancel them unless they have enough of an excuse to cancel them, because they want to have their base on board with them. I don't think they want to declare, put into effect the Insurrection Act unless they think that whatever has led to them to declare the Insurrection Act is sufficient to keep their base with them. I don't think they want to lose their base. So, I think they may seem to be a bunch of morons, but they're not, and they're very calculating, and they're thinking very carefully about how can we institute fascism, and how can we actually make it work and stick and not result in a popular uprising.
And the rise of fascism here in the unions, they talk about authoritarianism, not fascism, but authoritarianism. Fascism has a particular history in Germany, in Italy, and Spain, the rise of a fascist movement. I think there's a fear in the trade union bureaucracy of even getting into what is fascism? Why is fascism? Because isn't fascism a product of the crisis of capitalism and imperialism?
Yeah. Fascism, I guess it has a lot of different definitions, right? But, when Hitler came to power, it was all about the capitalist state being basically suspending democracy and embracing the corporations, the arms companies and banks, and
That
with
sounds
this
like the United States.
obsessive, yeah, and with an obsessive opposition to the left, which yeah, I mean, it's all very much like what happened back then. There's so many parallels. It's really we could talk for hours about the parallels between now and the 1930s, and we could have very, I think, important, discussions about the history of, like, are we currently in? Is this 1933 or is this 1938? I think it's either 1933 or 1938, and I'm not sure which, but we're definitely on our way towards uh, bad things if we don't figure out how to actually organize a massively inclusive uh, movement against all of this madness. But
Well,
I,
one of the things about the
don't
history
see
of
that happen.
one of the things about the history of the American working class is it has a very powerful history of solidarity
Yeah,
and mobilization. There have been general strikes, even though most workers were unaware that there have been general strikes. The class struggle in the United States has been massive, and there hasn't been a mass working class movement since the 30s and 40s in our lifetime. There has been no
yeah,
mass working class movement. And I think that
no.
they're pushing in that direction towards a mass working class movement. Are the capitalists and the fascists going to be able to control it if there's a mass working class movement in this country?
I mean, so far they've done a great job of preventing a mass working class movement. I mean, I think this society is generally as divided and conquered as it could possibly be without having a civil war. I mean, the impact of social media on society and the impact on social media of making it virtually impossible for us to sort of collectively have conversations. I mean, seeing what happened to the sort of, I guess you could say, like, anarchist oriented end of the sort of global justice movement, prior to social media, compared to what's happened to that kind of general milieu since the beginning of social media. It's been a complete disaster. Before social media, even with the presence of the infiltration and the provocateurs and everything else, there was a real debate around tactics, and people who had more intelligent ideas about effective tactics, in my view, were winning the arguments, on so many occasions. But since social media came around, the most extreme, ridiculous, moronic, ineffective tactics are the ones that rise to the top in the algorithms, and the ability to use social media to organize has proven itself to be completely impossible by design. Anybody still trying to organize on social media is just, they might as well just shoot themselves in their feet. I mean, it just really doesn't work, and
But
that's by design. The
there have
idea,
been mass protests. I mean, the No Kings protests. There have been the protest organized against Tesla and Elon Musk all over the country as a fascist and against the oligarchy. It seems there's a rising anti-capitalist, anti-fascist movement in the United States.
I I don't see that. What I see is there's a conflict between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the Democrats are trying to form some kind of an astroturf movement, and they're doing it by blanket coverage on the media. I mean, if those No Kings protests were any smaller than they were, it would be shocking, because they got more media coverage for weeks prior to their happening than any protests I've ever seen in my life. I mean, if you recall 2003, and the 13 million people who turned out to protest against the war in Iraq, including like 500,000 people in New York City, we did that without any media publicity. We organized those protests by word of mouth in the grassroots, on the grassroots email lists, on talking to people. I mean, it was just and it was effective organizing, and we got a lot of people out. But that had nothing to do with media coverage. Since Occupy Wall Street, especially, but maybe Camp Casey, but especially in the more like in the past 15 years or so, 10 years especially, the polarization of the media between sort of Republican media and Democratic media has meant that protests get covered by the media now. As you, I'm sure, recall, throughout the 80s and 90s, certainly, in early aughts, and I believe it was also true by the late 70s. Protests did not get media coverage. They ignored us completely. They realized that they made a mistake in the 60s by giving the protest movement as much coverage as they did, even though it was really mostly really bad coverage. And they made up for that by realizing we're just not going to pay any attention to these people, no matter how big their movements are. So, we had all those huge numbers of people protesting in 2003, and that made its way into a front page article in the New York Times, and people were like ecstatic. Oh my God, the media covered a protest. But what has happened in the past 10, 15 years is they cover the protests if they want to cover them. So if it's an anti-Trump protest, they cover it. If it's about housing justice, they don't cover it. So as you probably, I don't know, maybe it's better in the Bay Area, but in Portland, if we have a protest related to housing issues, we'll be lucky if we get 50 or 60 people coming to it. But if it's a No Kings rally, there will be many, many thousands. But the difference there is the housing protest will not be mentioned by any media, and the No Kings protest will be promoted by all the media for weeks beforehand.
So
that's not a social movement. That's
the gentrification, the fight against gentrification that's taking place is massive. It's one of the reasons Mondami won. People are afraid they're not going to have any housing. They're being driven out of cities by developers, by speculators. I mean, the conditions for a mass movement for housing is growing, and people are in a state of panic that they're going to lose their homes. They cannot afford.
Absolutely. And that's been the case for decades. I mean, we have now, 10 years ago, it was the case that 1 in 9 households is evicted every year in this country. I mean, with every 10% rise in the cost of housing, there's a 10% rise in the numbers of people homeless. It's a direct correlation. And it's, absolutely, it's like half the population is living hand to mouth at this point, basically paycheck to paycheck and in no position to be able to deal with any kind of an emergency without basically, ending up, on the street. It's a dire situation, but it is so badly covered by the mass media, and they cover the housing situation as if the idea of rent control is assumed to be completely impossible and ineffective and not something to even discuss. Meanwhile, other countries have laws where you can't own more than 1 or 2 houses, where the rent control is instituted nationally by the government. And these are some of the most prosperous societies in the world with the least expensive housing. You can buy a house in Denmark or in France or in Norway for $60,000, and I am not lying. This is a fact, and a nice house. It is crazy that people assume that somehow or another we have to be paying $500,000 or $1 million to live in a little house. That has nothing to do with reality. That's just about capitalism, monopolizing the land and doing what they, BlackRock calling the shots. BlackRock charges what they want, and then everybody else says, "Oh, BlackRock can get away with that. We'll do it too." That's the mom and pop landlord mentality, so-called mom and pop. I mean, the people that own, the millionaires that own 5 or 6 houses and live off of the rent and call themselves mom and pop landlords. They generally, of course, there's some wonderful ones out there. I'm not trying to say they're all bad. There's some wonderful ones out there, but they have every incentive from living in this capitalist system to just see what BlackRock is charging for a 2-bedroom apartment and charge the same thing, or maybe $100 less. And if they charge $100 less, then they can think that they're really progressive. I mean, some of them are already underwater in some kind of mortgage, and that's why they're charging so much. Mostly that's not the situation. It's largely big corporations that are just making more money than ever by just running, being a big landlord business, hiring property management companies like BlackRock is doing all over the country. But this absolutely is a massive crisis. The crisis of the working class and of housing and price of insurance and everything else. I mean, we are in an absolutely massive economic crisis right now, but you won't hear about that on the Western media really in that way. The way I'm laying it out, they're not going to lay it out anything like that. And they're certainly not going to mention that solutions are easily available and have already been applied in this country in the past and worked fine for a long time. We had rent control in most states, and that worked just fine until they got rid of it in the 80s, which was another thing that most people have no idea about, the landlord lobby systematically lobbying every legislature in every state in the country to systematically repeal rent control laws in one state after another. By the time people noticed, it was already over. They did it at a time when rent was really cheap in the cities, and most people well, most white people didn't want to live in the cities. They wanted to move, and they were moving, and so it was like the perfect time to you know, do that to all the cities, you know, to get rid of rent control, because the rent was cheap and it continued to be cheap for a while after they got rid of rent control, you know, and then you know, the big influx of people wanting to move back into the cities from the suburbs started in the 90s, and it's been just and then then with 2007 it got astronomically worse, you know, with the bank bailouts and the concentration of wealth into fewer and fewer hands and landlords. And yeah, it's but there is no sign of a mass movement to do anything about the housing crisis in Portland. I can tell you that. No sign at all. I mean, there was, but the best organizers were all canceled through social media practices, and none of them can do any organizing. And I'm one of them. I'm canceled. But the Bay Area and New York City and Kansas City, and there's some places where it looks like there's much more happening around housing, and that's and I love seeing those big marches in Oakland and San Francisco and New York City, but I'm not seeing that kind of energy in most other parts of this country.
Said there is a class war, and I'm winning the class war.
Yeah, that's right.
One-sided class war. Well, this
That's
class
right.
division, this growing class division and hatred against the billionaires, against the capitalist class, this is going to continue to grow. And I think that that's something that the working class and unions need to mobilize around against capitalism and against a capitalist structure which is destroying the working class. And I think AI is an example of that, which is forcing workers against the wall. Truck drivers in California,
Absolutely.
the Democrats passed a bill to require a truck driver, if you have a truck over 10,000 pounds. It was vetoed twice by Gavin Newsom, who took $10 million from Google. The unions did not demand that he override the veto. So they're going to be bringing in autonomous trucks in California. They already have thousands of autonomous cars, which
Yeah.
is going to lead to the loss of millions of jobs, of workers. No program
Yeah.
of the Democrats to provide for
No,
workers. No program to even look at the cost of AI, the cost of autonomous vehicles to the working class.
it's all coming very, very fast, and it will keep getting faster, and people will be unable to even keep track of what's going on because it's happening so fast. I mean, it's like a constant state of future shock, you know, and the future shock will just keep on getting worse by the day. You know, I'm experiencing it myself, but I know so many other people are experiencing it so much more because they don't pay attention to technological developments as closely as some of us do, and they don't they're not trying to understand what's happening. You know, they're
And
just
you're writing
hearing
about
from
it
some.
using this AI technology.
Well, I'm writing songs about it. Yeah, using AI technology for the music. Not I'm not using AI for writing. Although I use AI for a lot of. I mean, in writing in terms of lyric writing or prose writing, I don't use it for that, but I use it for a lot of research, and it's an incredible tool for research and for all kinds of things.
And what's your view about general artificial intelligence? The idea that the machines can actually take over society and
Yeah.
run the world.
Well, I mean, so the idea that, you know, they talk about with artificial general intelligence is once AI is, you know, so what they call agentic AI, but it's like it's way past agentic. It's to the point where it just does, you know, whatever it wants and learns about whatever it wants at whatever pace that it can. And the idea there is that once there's no more human guidance or control over the AI educating itself, and it's able to just educate itself by itself without human intervention, the speed of that process will be such that you'll never know what's going to happen. You know, maybe a few days it's something, you know, everything will change because what AI, you know, all working together like that might be able to accomplish over the course of a few days is impossible for any human to imagine. I think it's a very real prospect, but not being God, I don't know, and nobody seems to know if it, you know, how real a prospect it is. But there's a lot of very, very intelligent people who are very, very worried about it. And you know, if there's even a 1% chance that the AGI could lead to, you know, you know, that sort of collective AI no longer thinking that obeying the humans or looking after the humans is of interest to them. Who knows what could happen? I think, you know, it may or may not be a realistic prospect, but if there's even a slight chance that it is, then it's extremely worrying. And but it's going to be it's an arms race, though. The thing is that it's extremely worrying, but it's also something that everybody in the tech industries are trying to race towards. Everybody wants to be the first one to achieve AGI, because once they do, they're going to rule the world, basically.
But isn't it also a threat to capitalism? Because the development of AI, the elimination of labor, means you don't have workers to buy products. And capitalism operates on producing commodities for exchange for surplus value for profit. If there are no consumers to buy the products, how does capitalism continue to exist?
Well, that's been a really big question for ever since, for a very long time, right? I mean, in the past, in the 1840s, when there was the potato blight all over Europe, and basically industry shut down because nobody had any spending money that they could spend on anything other than food. And so it led to massive rebellions. Every monarchy in Europe, other than England and Russia, was overthrown by the peasant rebellions. Tens of thousands of people were killed. And that is what led to the kinds of reforms that led to things like, the beginnings of a welfare state in a lot of countries, and the beginnings of some real forms of democracy with real elections that were, where it was possible for grassroots parties to rise up in the parliaments and stuff. All that happened as a result of this complete chaos of hunger and famine and all the industry closing and rebellion. And the whole idea of having the industry was for the capitalists to make lots of money off of running these factories. But of course, if all the factory workers are unemployed and can't afford to buy anything, they weren't selling anything. So it was a terrible crisis for capitalism, and capitalism has gone through exactly that kind of crisis multiple times since the 1840s. What the state did in the United States after the same kind of crisis of capitalism happened in the 1930s was institute serious government spending on all kinds of things, like the welfare state, unemployment insurance, all that. And what we're going to need if we're going to survive as a species in the face of this new industrial revolution is going to be, I think, a vastly stepped up version of that welfare state, much more like we've got to be the working class. The people have got to be included in this whole project, because otherwise we'll all be excluded. And how capitalism is going to deal with it, I don't know. But a lot of the capitalists are calling for universal basic income. I don't know if that itself is going to be enough to, prevent a crisis of capitalism. But that's certainly the more enlightened elements of the tech aristocracy are in favor of universal basic income.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much.
I got to go pretty soon.
Thanks for joining us. We've been talking with
Thank you, Steve.
David Rovics about the crisis of capitalism, AI, how he's using it, and the future of the working class. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Steve.
There are no playgrounds left, all of them destroyed by explosives or bulldozers systematically deployed, which destroyed the schools with all the carnage.